Hey everyone, I'm super pumped, super hyped to be here to talk about Matcha. The title of my talk is Building a Better Decentralized Exchange. And I'm John. I'm an engineer over at Xero Labs. We work on the Xero protocol and a lot of different integrations and different horizontals and verticals associated with that. And more recently, I've been focused on Matcha full-time lately, and that's going to be the focus of my talk today. So before we get started, though, I think it's good to introduce some context. Right, if you don't watch the DEX space very closely, it's very easy to miss some of the growth that has occurred lately, even like if you haven't checked in the past 6 months, right? So I always like to start with kind of this chart. I just pulled it from Dune Analytics, my favorite analytics. But essentially it shows 2019 and 2020 aggregate volumes of decentralized exchanges month over month. So compared last year to this year, and we can see that volume is really exploding across the DEX space, right? We're clearing over $1 billion cumulatively over all DEXs in just 1 month, where previously it took like half a year to get that much volume. And so, you know, when people ask me, why should I care about the DEX space? It's these charts kind of make it apparent that I think DEXs are here to stay, and they're getting more powerful every single day, right? So this is just a really exciting chart. I mean, even if you go back to 2018, it's even way less, and looking forward to like 2021 to review these charts again. I'm sure they'll look different as well. So yeah, so as to like, why should I care? I think this is a good reason to care. There's a lot of opportunity here, and it's not just competing for existing market share, right? It's a positive sum game, and the space is growing, right? And so just looking at kind of the state of DEXs, more in the lens of this year, 2020, liquidity is becoming really comparable. More often than not, we'll see spreads that are competitive with Coinbase Pro, and sometimes even better than Coinbase Pro. A lot of these stablecoin exchanges are getting extremely good at what they do. And DeFi seems to be attaining some sort of product market fit. The governance, incentives, kind of the usage is all aligning in a really interesting way. And as usual, I have to bring up its non-custodial permissionless. If you're unfamiliar with DEXs, this is some of my favorite parts of why DEXs are important. They're censorship resistant. You can make a trade. No one really can stop you here. And then more recently, we've been seeing the ability to aggregate across different liquidity pools, different protocols. Xero is pretty good at that, as it's a really high fidelity protocol. So it's able to aggregate lower fidelity protocols pretty easily. And then probably the most excited for me is like exotic financial instruments are starting to appear, you know, options, futures, margin trading, and that will really dwarf the current volume of just spot trading. So a lot to look forward to here. And then, yeah, if you haven't used the DEX in a minute, or if you haven't ever, there's always some shortcomings compared to centralized exchanges, but we're quickly observing these shortcomings and finding ways to get around them, right? So like a lot of what our user feedback said was they're unfriendly to newcomers. They're not sure why they're trading this certain asset. Like, what is CUSDC versus USDC? And you know, some of these assets, unless you know kind of tribal knowledge here, you're unfamiliar with them. So getting to know the assets a little bit better was something that people request. Designs, which Chris talked about yesterday. If you missed that talk, definitely go check that out. It's a good talk around Matcha and product design and kind of philosophies around DEX design. We also get that it's lacking a lot of personalization, account history. Like you have to go to Etherscan to figure out where your last trade was. So getting things in one space is really important. And then as always, trade finality is always something that can be improved. You have to wait a block to make sure that your trade's settled. And I think we're looking at different ways to scale that and kind of get faster finality in general as an ecosystem. Cool. So that little overview aside, taking a step back, this talk is focused around Matcha, and that's Xero's new flagship decentralized exchange. And Chris kind of walked you through it. I'm not going to walk you through it. I'll show you a couple of screenshots just so we have some context. I really wanted to talk about the technical features inside of Matcha. And so you'll get to play with Matcha in about a week. We'll have our public release very soon. So I'm super excited for that. But essentially, we took a step back, looked at first principles across DEXs, centralized exchanges, even traditional equity exchanges, Robinhood, E-Trade, you name it. And we kind of put all our favorite things together, figured out what we can make better, what we can improve, and we kind of bring our own spin of a decentralized exchange to the table. And I'm super excited to kind of walk it through with you some of my favorite features. And then, just as a reminder, this is our market page. So you can trade different assets here. You can click different combinations of assets, trade them. You have a chart with different timescales. You have your assets explained. And we have a bunch of other cool features that we're adding every day to these kind of pages. And, we thought really holistically about design. I won't go into design too much today because Chris did that yesterday, but I really love the intentionality we've put into our design. I think it's really awesome, really exciting, and no one else in this space is really thinking that way. So definitely a differentiator there. But I kind of want to talk about technical features. And so I have a list of things that I kind of want to go through today and talk about. The first one's going to be Xero API. We'll go through meta transactions, limit orders, DEX aggregations, performance of web apps, and just a couple other things that I think are important to call out. But starting with Xero API, I want to spend a few minutes on this because it's extremely important. It allows Matcha to just build the front end out and be extremely focused on the end user experience, right? And so what Xero API is, it's essentially a hosted backend or self-hosted if you want. It's completely open source, where it aggregates liquidity, assembles your transactions, does a lot of the heavy lifting of interacting with the Ethereum blockchain. And what's cool about Xero API is it's just an HTTP call, right? You call this service, you say, hey, I'd like to sell 1 ETH for DAI. It returns you a set of orders that you can just post straight to the blockchain. You literally do like web3.send transaction, whatever your web3 wrapper is, and it just works. And I'll get into kind of the technicals of that in just a second. But first, I kind of wanted to talk about Xero API liquidity, because I think this is a good marketing image, and it kind of shows we aggregate across different sources of liquidity, but I think Xero liquidity is even more nuanced. So I drew a little diagram, and so basically, when I think of Xero API liquidity, this is how I think about it. Over on the left, we have our AMMs, and so we have Curve, Uniswap, V1, V2, Kyber. We have some private AM market makers. We have Oasis. We have a lot more coming out. I think we're looking at Balancer probably next. But in addition to that, we also have this peer-to-peer liquidity, Xero Mesh, and I think that's really important to talk about as well, because that allows us to do a lot of really cool stuff. And essentially, it's a peer-to-peer distributed order book that is decentralized and distributed, right? And so essentially, you can post to this order book to a node, and the node will propagate your order all across this network. So if one node goes down, your order still persists across this network. And so we have nodes all over the world hosted by all the different kinds of people supporting Xero Mesh. And it's a lot like if you've ever downloaded a torrent or something like that. It's essentially a distributed hash table is the computer science term of it. But really exciting stuff we're doing there. And that allows you to do cool things like, for example, orders don't need to belong on the blockchain. There's nothing you need to save about that, like a potential order, right? Like there's no exchange involved, there's no settlement. And so hosting these orders in this peer-to-peer layer is super important because it's free, essentially. Like you can just post this order for free, sign a message saying you want to buy or sell something. And it doesn't need to exist on the blockchain. What does need to exist on the blockchain is the actual trade settlement. So when someone takes a trade and says, yes, I want to fill this trade, that settlement is what's important. And that's what actually ends up on the blockchain. And then in addition to that, we also have professional market makers. So anytime you hit the Xero API with a quote or like asking for a quote, we also defer out to market makers, and they have a real-time look at all the prices, unlike AMMs who only kind of look at windows in time, like every 14 seconds per block, right? They're able to look around real time and see what's going on and offer some of the best prices. Like some of the best prices you can get on Ethereum are through our market makers, which is super cool. So yeah, I just wanted to call out that, you know, this liquidity is nuanced but extremely like advanced, and I think it's super exciting. Cool. So, and then, you know, we're not the only ones building on top of this. That's the awesome part of this, is anyone can come to the table and kind of build their own front end implementation. You know, I see liquidity eventually being a commodity, and it's a lot like electricity or power. You won't care where it comes from eventually. It's just that it's a commodity, and so you can pull from it whenever you need to, and you can focus more on building your app out. And then just some points on Xero API real quick. It's fast integration. You can use your HTTP patterns, so like you don't have to learn Solidity. You don't have to know these new ways to interact with this API. It's Web 2.0 friendly, and it's managed hosting. You don't have to worry about hosting it. We like Xerox Labs runs the Kubernetes and everything, and makes sure everything scales, and our uptime is really nice. Or if you want, you can bail out and self-host. And then in addition, it's always improving. There's a lot of really cool features, like we burn gas tokens for users. The smart order routing is the best in class. I totally recommend reading the blog post at the bottom. I believe we have the most advanced smart order routing out there. And then a lot of cool features that we have planned for the next few quarters there. And then just if we have any programmers watching this, it's extremely easy to consume this liquidity, like I was saying earlier. This is a React hook that we have in Matcha, and it's essentially just a quote. You say, I want to buy DAI for my ETH, and I'm selling 1 ETH, and it just returns you a quote. And behind the scenes in this hook, it's doing a fetch, like just a get, and then you just send it straight off to the blockchain, and you're good to go. It's really that easy. So it's allowed us to really focus on the end user experience rather than worrying about this liquidity. So I wanted to take some time to talk about that, because I do think that's a big building block of Matcha. And so, you know, it runs everywhere. Anywhere you see a price or a swap quote or something like that, it's probably via Matcha. Cool. So now that we kind of talked about the back end of that, I want to talk about another cool feature that kind of differentiates Matcha with a lot of the other decentralized exchanges, right? And so at a high level, if you're unfamiliar with what a meta transaction is, it's essentially, instead of a user submitting a transaction directly to the blockchain and paying that gas fee and having to set it up themselves, you can essentially send it through an intermediary where they can pay the gas, or they can pay part of the gas, or whatever system you want to set up there. And it settles on the Ethereum blockchain just the same, but again, the user doesn't necessarily have to pay, or you can control the fee they want to pay, instead of just having the user spend the gas themselves, right? And so if we're looking at this in more of like a deeper dive, essentially looks something like this, right? And forgive my drawing, but I wanted to draw this to kind of show how this works. And so from left to right, essentially you're a user on Matcha, you type in your quote, you hit confirm, you'll get a message to sign. And remember, messages are free to sign. They don't require gas, right? And so you'll essentially submit this cryptographically signed message with a Xerox order in it. And so that makes sure that there's no way we can mess with your order. You're always going to get what you've asked for, right? There's no way the Xerox API can kind of mess with your transaction. And so when you send that to the Xerox API, we assemble that transaction for you, and then we pass it through, you know, a few layers of security. And then eventually we have what's called transaction signers, and they're horizontally scaled nodes that their jobs are just to push these transactions to the blockchain and wait for them, and you know, like bump them up if they get pushed out or whatever. But they are responsible for making sure they pay the fee to the blockchain, and making sure that it gets signed successfully. So this is kind of what it looks like from more of like a mid-level diagram. And so that's really exciting, because with everything flowing through meta transactions, we can kind of control how users pay. So we can come up with like a credit system or a loyalty system. There's a lot of really cool building blocks on top of meta transactions once you get meta transactions working, and so that's really exciting. Like if you go to Matcha right now, most orders are flowed through meta transactions. Cool. The next one I wanted to talk about is limit orders. Super exciting. My favorite mechanism for trading personally, because it prevents me from like FOMOing into a trade. And so we spent some time, on the front end side engineering this. So a lot of D3, we pulled a dragger that you can kind of interact with your graphs. I think that's something that's missing from a lot of these dexes is like interactive charts that are easier to understand rather than just text fields. And so like this is one of our interactive charts, and we have a lot more planned, especially with like hopefully we'll get to stop losses. There's a lot of really cool mechanisms. Well, not only trading mechanisms, but UI interactions with those trading mechanisms that are really underexplored, I think. And so yeah, you can go try this out today. It's super cool. It's live on our beta site. And so from a diagram standpoint, just wanted to take you through how limit orders work at a mid-level kind of perspective, right? So again, I'll sign an order, which is free. So that's the cool part is limit orders are free to place, right? Sell my ETH when it's 280 USDC, right? You sign that order, you cryptographically secure it. You make sure because it's a 0x order, it's secure, you're always going to get what you want. And then essentially what we do is we submit that to 0x Mesh, like I was talking about before, this order book that lives off chain, but is distributed and decentralized. So you get all the perks of the blockchain without having to worry about needing the settlement layer, because you don't really need it yet, right? You need it when the transaction settles. And so what happens there is once it's in 0x Mesh, there's ARB bots. I think of them like sharks just swimming around this like tank of liquidity, and they're watching the price of ETH. And as soon as it's advantageous for them to consume that limit order, they'll go and grab it and say, I want this, because ETH will spike to 282 or something, where it's in their incentive to basically buy that order, right? And so they'll consume that from 0x Mesh, and then they'll settle that onto the blockchain. And so this is free for users. I think it's a really cool feature, especially when you integrate it with some really nice like UI UX affordances. Cool. And then next, I kind of wanted to talk about web app quality. We've put a large amount of focus into making Matcha the most performant and like fastest app out there, right? We cache to global edge CDNs. We follow every best practice we can, HTTPS, HTTPS2. We use Next. It's just, we put a lot of time and care into our front end development. And so every animation, is 60 frames per second. If you're a front end developer watching, there's certain properties when you animate that cause the entire page to repaint basically, and they're very slow. And every time things move, it repaints the entire page. But there's other ways to do it extremely performantly. They're harder, but then like, let's say you have a box animating up and down. If you use a certain transform instead, it defers to the GPU to render extremely fast instead of having to repaint this entire screen on the CPU instead. And so we've gone to great lengths to make sure that your app loads fast, it's robust, and it just feels performant and feels good when you use it. And this is across all devices. We try to make sure that even if you're on a mobile device, you get a performant experience. I wanted to mention our tech stack for just a little bit, because I think these are novel things to use, and I really enjoy the tech stack we use. We use TypeScript in strict mode, so it's a little different than just TypeScript. We make sure that no undefines get through. We believe in types a lot, so you're gonna, rarely should you see the app just explode, hopefully. And then we use Next for server-side generation, server-side rendering, and then we hydrate on the client side. So it's best of all worlds. And the next slide, I'll talk about that a little bit. And then, yeah, we make sure our styled components is server rendered out all the static stuff. We apply it on the server side when it's compiled. And then we hydrate all the dynamic CSS that we need. And so I kind of just wanted to talk about how we do rendering here. And I think it's kind of cool. So essentially we have this template with a marketing page, and it accepts two parameters, your quote, your base, and your quote pair. And then on the bottom left, we have all our token combinations, and we have well over 400 combinations of tokens, and those increase over time. And so what we do is we take these two when we're building the app, and we essentially build the 400 pages. Like, you will literally get 400 pages in your static output. And like, why is that useful, right? Well, we can pre-render, we can pre-compile all these pages with the asset descriptions, like basically everything that we know statically ahead of time, and then hydrate any dynamic data when the client is requested. And so what's cool about that is SEO, right? You can search for any pair, and since it's a statically compiled page, like if I search for Matcha ETH DAI on Google, I'll find that page with all the correct SEO instead of just saying this is a trading page, like a generic trading page. And so that's works for discoverability, and it also increases load times, right? There's less to render on the client. And so that's a really cool feature that we've seen extremely high gains from, like performance-wise, and just all around better experiences for the user, because we have to transmit less JavaScript over the wire. Cool. And then kind of want to talk about privacy. I'm always surprised how many people are still using Google Analytics. And so we took a very privacy-centered approach with our decentralized exchange. And in fact, we heard from users, they say, hey, please don't use Google Analytics, don't use like Amplitude and a couple other things that they really wanted out of the app. And we listen to our users. And even though it's harder for us, we have less insights into our analytics, we chose a privacy-focused analytics. So all the analytics stay with us, we own them essentially, and they don't track users. And it's completely like anonymous. We like Fathom Analytics, the analytics we chose doesn't even give us the option to track users. Like, it's not even built in. You can only track like anonymous events, and it's less insightful than Google Analytics, but it's much less invasive. And so we only want to know if you completed a trade or backed out. We don't really care who you are, how much you're trading. We just want to make sure the experience, like you can complete the checkout experience without running into bugs. And that's really all we want to collect from our users. We hope that, we'll rely on users in Discord and Telegram to kind of notify us when they want certain features instead of having to spy on them. And so just want to call out that we are doing everything we can to make this the most private DEX that we can. And I think it's a huge improvement upon others if you kind of look at your network tab when you go to some of our competitors and where your data is going. So essentially, like what's next, right? And so, well, Matcha is going to be released soon, within a week or so. And so be on the lookout for that. Super excited about that. And essentially, we're looking at adding more assets, more instruments in general. And I think there's some really exciting opportunities there, more liquidity sources. We're engaging with different token communities to make these asset pages that we have owned by the community. And we want that to be a place where people go and kind of learn about assets in a decentralized way, right? Like, you shouldn't have to wait on Coinbase to put up a page or something. We want to be the place you go to. In addition, we have a bunch of different features that we're working on that I'm super excited for. But I'd just say watch out in Q3 and Q4. I think we have some really cool stuff coming out. And then lastly, I just wanted to call out that if any of this interests you, we are hiring all across the board at XeroX Labs. We have a position open on the XeroX API team, or the team that works on XeroX API rather, backend, full stack, you name it. whatever you want to do there. And then on Matcha side, we have a front end position opened right now, just for one person. There's only two other engineers. It's me and one other person. And so you join a very close knit team, and we move really fast. We build and we ship daily, or actually multiple times a day. But yeah, I just want to thank you, and thank you for inviting me out here. I love talking about matcha, and I'm happy to entertain any questions people have.